you've bought anything except a Commodore and you're wondering, hey, I wonder if I should put an LS in this. Probably. All right, so you're thinking about doing an LS swap, all right? And you're sitting there and you think it's really easy and you can't wait to get started. How do you go about it? Here's a few things, a few tips and tricks, things you might want to know if you're thinking about LS swapping any chassis. Doesn't matter. Here specifically, we've got an S14 with a turbo LS in it. Start with the biggest item, I guess, is your engine, right? So you've got various different varieties of LS that you could go with. Once upon a time, you could get an LS1 dirt cheap, and that was the go-to because they were dirt cheap and they were still good. Ever since the old COVID station hit the nation, it's been pretty f***ed up. LS1s are no longer really that cheap. It's not really considered the cheap engine swap option anymore. Even like an LS1 now, in pretty standard unknown condition, is like $3 grand, whereas once upon a time you would get a whole car for that. A lot of people are starting to import them now from the States, like the 5.3 iron blocks and stuff like that. If you want to get really serious about boost, you'd go an iron block.
What do you need to get it in there?
What do you need to get it in there? Well, we haven't finished the first segment yet. So deciding on the LS engine that you want, right? There's a few different ways. If you're just trying to look for like a little 300 horsepower, 350 horsepower, you know, like a nice, just a quick, simple, drop in 300 horsepower, can't really go past the LS1. They are the most common here still, and they would still be the cheapest. If you're looking at boost, and you're thinking about going into a boosted application, in a perfect world, you'll be getting an L98, which is a 6-litre alloy block still. So there's still a nice light block, but they had a better design pretty much all round, and they were better, could take boost better stock in stock form. 800 horsepower in a stock bottom end L98 is pretty common. And then if you want to go any higher than that, pretty much looking at an iron block is your best bet. If this is your first engine swap, don't go straight for an iron block because you won't finish it and you'll be sad because they cost lots and lots of money. How do you get it in there, said George? The best bet is if you've got a common chassis, get on Google and look up LS into your chassis engine mounts. Chances are, unless you've got a weird chassis, which generally that's all that I ever have, but if you've got a pretty common chassis, the chances are somebody's made LS engine mounts to bolt your LS1 or LS whatever into your chassis. The mounts in this are a bolt-in engine mount that bolts into the factory crossmember, and then from there they bolt straight onto an adapted block mount. So there's no fabrication, there's no cutting and shutting or anything like that. You buy it, you bolt it in, it's now sitting there, which was the case in the Jag. We bought the mounts for that, sat it in there, bolted it up, done.
Bought, not built?
Bought, not built, that's right. Wherever possible, buy things. Somebody else has already done the hard work for you, and you can just sit back and relax. So sumps for LSs. There are two different varieties of OEM sump that you can buy for the LS engine, and the beauty about them is they bolt on and off pretty easily. So you have the front sump and the rear sump. 90% of the times when you're putting them into small chassis like these S chassis or anything like that, you're going to want a front sump, and generally for almost anything you're pretty much going to want a front sump. Actually, I've got a rear sump in mine, so that's awkward. Another point, depending on where your rack sits and where your crossmember sits in relation to the engine, you are either going to want a front sump, which means the reservoir of oil is at the front of the sump, or a rear sump, which means the opposite obviously. Aeroflow is a bit of a taboo topic, but they make a very good rear sump, very good cast aluminium rear sump, which I think is about $400 or something like that. And by the time you pay some wankers prices on Marketplace for a stock one, it's probably not too bad of an option. LS1s, I believe, had front sumps, and then LS2s, I believe, had rear sumps. I could be very wrong there, but basically you can get an OEM option that was either a front or a rear sump, and you can bolt them up to the blocks. The only thing that's different is oil filter location on the sump, but other than that, you can just change them in and out very, very easily. Starter motor relocations. So this one has a custom-made rod shop starter motor relocation. So the problems with putting these into small chassis they weren't designed to, the starter motor fouls on the steering shaft a lot of the times. If you've got custom headers, they can foul on the custom headers going down through the tunnel. So the way that they get around that is they change the starter motor location from the driver's side to the passenger side, because then they are away from the steering shaft. Because they're a GM engine, which is an American engine, and obviously they're all left-hand drive. The steering shaft would be on the left-hand side, which is why they've got the starter motors on the driver's side. Because the LS is obviously, it's a GM derivative from America. It's not Australian made. It's just Australian taken. There's a couple of options you can go with headers depending on what application you're using. So if you're boosting it, these are symmetrical heads. The heads can go on either side of the engine, doesn't matter, they can flip around, do whatever you want. And two, you can flip your manifolds upside down and switch sides, which gives you the ability to essentially make turbo headers very easily. And the good thing about these GM headers is they do flow quite well for factory cast headers. There was a dyno comparison somebody did not that long ago with LSA factory headers, and when they went to like an aftermarket style tubular runner, they didn't make any more power. So just goes to show that the headers at that stage, weren't a restriction, so really not an issue. The Jaguar has factory headers. Another one of our friends, 1,000 horsepower Commodores, has factory headers. Somewhere you can kind of save a little bit of money. You don't have to go out and get aftermarket extractors. What else do you want to know, George?
How do you do it again?
You just bolt it up. Just bolts up with bolts. Being that they are a common engine, there are almost an unlimited amount of options that you can go gearbox wise. The better part of that is the factory sort of options. Gearboxes that these things come with are pretty good, and many older model gearboxes still fit them. So the main manual gearbox that you're ever going to put behind an LS is a T56, which is a box that they come with, or a TR6060. Both very capable boxes. Don't really hear of anybody having issues with them when they're rebuilt and sort of like revamped. You can have 800 to 1,000 horsepower depending on how you actually drive the thing, obviously with a clutch to suit. Automatics, because they're a very common bolt pattern, bell housing pattern, they fit all like GM style gearboxes, so turbo 400s, power glides, everything like that. You can get bell housings that just bolt straight up to it, so you don't have to worry about an adapter plate, which is sometimes a sort of a big issue when you go into like the smaller stuff or slightly less common stuff, or pretty much anything that's not GM is when you run into that issue. So we have a power glide behind CA18, and it has an adapter bell housing because obviously they never made a power glide to CA, whereas they put turbo 400s behind LSs. It's already happened in a factory application. There's plenty of really good, really strong gearbox options, so you're not going to be struggling to find a gearbox to put behind the thing, which sometimes you can get if you go down the path of like a little bit more of a left-wing powertrain. ECUs for these things, there's a couple ways you can go. The factory ECUs are quite capable, and plenty of people still run them at like a high power level, and they are quite simple to make standalone. There's like 4 wires on the ECU side that you have to give power and earth to, and then there is 2 wires in the body loom side of things that you have to give a separate power and earth to for the coil packs and injectors, and then that essentially standalones the ECU. It's quite a simple system. There's not too much cutting and shutting that you've got to do with a factory loom. These things are getting on a bit now, 20 years old basically. So the harnesses are starting to get like a little bit on the crappier side to where you wouldn't really want to start or continue reusing them. But again, the thing with them is that everybody puts these things into everything, which means that there are plenty of options for people to go online and get reworked harnesses, reworked standalone harnesses. And because they're so simple to do, they are fairly cost effective. The other way you can go obviously is with a completely standalone ECU, like a Haltech or something like that. You can buy terminated harnesses for them, not too expensively as well, but the factory ECU can be tuned. People with HP tuners can tune them. Most tuners are able to tune a factory Commodore ECU, and they're fairly good in terms of like their ability to control the engine in a standalone application. I don't know what else George wants me to say. They don't have a distributor. They're quite a modern engine for the time really. So they've got a cam sensor and they've got a crank sensor. Super easy to change out. If you go to a boosted application, you can get an LSA 2-bar map sensor, pop it into the stock LS1 manifold, no worries at all, clicks in. They are literally a Lego engine. They are so easy to pull apart and put back together and put into anything else. Everything comes apart with either like a 13, 10 or a 15 mil, like all the gaskets that they use on them they're all O-rings. There's no paper gaskets, or they're metal composite rubber gaskets, so they're a metal frame with an O-ring inside it. Super easy to replace and just overall really simple. And there's a reason that people put them in everything. It's because they are that, like, not to sound like a LS fanboy, but they are just that good and that easy. When I did my first one, I could pull it apart and put it back together the first time with like 0 problems, just because they're that simple. What else, George? Oil pump upgrade, camshaft, new lifters, new lifter buckets, and valve springs. If you do those things, your LS is going to be super happy and it'll probably go forever and never break. If you're looking at doing an engine swap, and this is the first one you've ever done, LS, so simple everywhere. Everyone's done it. It's been done a million times. People think it's overdone until they've done it themselves, and then they sort of understand. That's my take on it anyway. Anyone who talks on it hasn't put one in a car yet and realised how nice and simple and easy and just works. Just go with an LS. They're just so simple and so good. Just slap them in, do the basics, and away you go. And if that all sounds too hard, give it to Daniel and he'll do it.